I'm your instructor. My name is Tyson Robertson. I have a background in art, photography, and digital media. My BFA is from Parsons School of Design, and I have an MFA from New York University. For the past 8 years, I've worked in digital media and content creation. I work with multiple companies to create content for their social media platforms and to sell their products. I've been a freelance photographer and done video work since about 2002. We're going to talk about Dreamweaver, and first we're going to talk a little bit about what exactly is Dreamweaver. So Adobe Dreamweaver is a website building software. This software has actually been around for a long time, probably over 20 years or so, but it actually was originally developed by a company called Macromedia. And that company was eventually bought out by Adobe in 2005. Adobe has changed and improved the software a lot over the years and in many respects. But in essence, Dreamweaver is kind of exactly the way it was when it first began. And that is a simple but really powerful website building tool. One of the things that made Dreamweaver a really powerful program was that it gave an ability to the designer to view both the code of a website at the same time as showing you a preview of what that code was making. Websites are made out of computer language codes, and one of the most common of these is something called HTML. This is Hypertext Markup Language. Learning something like HTML is really kind of speaking a foreign language. It's exactly like trying to learn some other language that you don't speak already. But if you understand how to code with HTML, you can make really basic websites quickly just by using simple tools like something like a word processing program like TextEdit. You could open up something like that, just type in characters that make up this code, and internet web browsers can understand that language and translate it into the visuals of a website of what you would see. This is something that is not super complicated of learning the basics of, but as you can imagine, just like if you're trying to learn a foreign language, sure, you could say a few words or start to learn a sentence or two, but to really be able to conversate fluently in another language takes a lot of skill and practice and time. It would be very difficult for you, and HTML is the same kind of way. So something that's really great about Dreamweaver is that it allows you to design without actually knowing any of the code. So you don't have any requirement to learn code and actually use it per se, but it gives you the ability to put code in there and edit the code, and it also helps you on making the code a little bit easier in a lot of respects as well. So if you know how to code and you're really good at coding, it's a great program because it allows you to just only look at the code and edit the code and work with that. If you don't know any code whatsoever, it's also a good program because it will kind of simplify the coding process for you. It doesn't really require you to use much code or any code at all, technically. And the code that you do have to use, it's going to not be super difficult for you to kind of jump into and do the basics with. So it's a nice program both for anyone that is a really high advanced code user or someone who's maybe a new person that's just learning some of these concepts of web code. Dreamweaver, it supports many types of coding languages. There's more than one. HTML is the one that I've mentioned before. There's also something called HTML5. There's something called CSS, PHP, there's JavaScript. There's different kinds of languages that exist that the internet and web browsers communicate with. Dreamweaver is relatively easy to use. It has a really great interface. And also, because it's an Adobe product, it syncs up with your other CC applications and it will integrate with them well. What I mean by that is a few things. One, it can bring files in from other types of CC applications, but also its layout is very familiar. Adobe has done a really good job of streamlining the way that they lay out a lot of their programs and the tools that they use and the way they kind of name things. So once you're familiar with one, it's not quite as of a learning curve to jump into some of the others. So it's going to allow you to kind of jump in, start to edit your code directly, learn some of the tools and get a feel for it. And if once you learn a bit of light coding, you'll be able to just jump in right away and not have much trouble at all. You can test your code, you can make sure that everything's functioning properly, and then you can go ahead and make your site live right from Dreamweaver. There are a lot of different ways to build a website. There's template-based services. Spark Page is an example of that. There's even popular sites out there such as Wix or Squarespace where they have templates that you can use. Those are all really great ways to build websites and to do them quickly and to make them look good, but sometimes they can be a little bit limiting as far as what you're able to do with them. So if you get a little bit of practice and you put some time into it, you can use a tool like Dreamweaver to give you a lot of control over your website and staying up with common web standards and new trends that appear. So now that we know a little bit about what Dreamweaver is, we're going to learn a little bit more about how to get our images ready to be put onto a website. So we know a little bit about what Dreamweaver is. Now we're going to start to get to a point where we're going to build something for Dreamweaver. We're going to actually start to try to build a site. And one of the first steps that we're going to need to do for that is to actually go ahead and get some content ready to put into that site. So for our site, and this is something that maybe would be a little bit different from other projects, we don't usually just jump right into Dreamweaver and start a new project. The first thing we really want to do is make sure that we have some content to put into it, and that content is kind of ready to go and formatted in the right way. For us, one of those main things that we're going to need is to make sure that we have some images. So we want to have some images that we're going to put into our website. And images for the internet have certain specific specifications that you're going to want to make sure that you follow. So I have a few images on my computer here that I want to use from my project. I have these downloaded already and they're ready to go, but they don't quite meet the needs of my project. So I'm going to have to change them a little bit. So the very first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to want to get these images open inside of a program like Photoshop, just as the example, so that I can edit them. So I'm actually going to right click on these and I'm going to tell it to open with Adobe Photoshop, and we're going to open them real quick. And the reason why I'm opening these images is because I need to make sure that they have the right resolution for my website, that they're the right size for my website, which is actually a different thing from resolution, and also that they're in the right kind of color space. A final thing that I would have to make sure that they are in the right requirement of is that they're the right kind of file type. The internet has specific types of file types that it needs to have for its images. If you've downloaded an image that came from the internet, like it was from a stock agency like Adobe Stock or something like that, it most likely would already be in the right kind of format. But it's still a good idea to make sure that we understand image formats, and so that we can check and make sure that they are the right kinds of images. So my images are now open here in Photoshop, and one thing that I can see already without even looking at the information of the files is that these images are quite large. They're quite big images. As I kind of cycle through each one, they fill my screen pretty good. And not only are they filling my screen, if I look at the very top here in Photoshop, it shows me what percentage this is zoomed in or out. This image, for example, is filling my whole screen, and it's at 33.3%, so it's not even at 100%. So at 100%, what do we show here, makes it even larger. It can't even fit inside of the screen. So it's a really big image. If I tried to put this on my website, it would be way too large to sit on the screen properly. It maybe would be great if I need it to kind of be a background or something that's going to fill a whole big space. But if I wanted it to be sort of like a thumbnail or something that's just kind of placed in somewhere, it's way too big for that purpose. Part of the reason why it's a really good idea to make sure that our images are the right resolution and the right size is that we want to make sure that they look good, but we also don't need them to be larger than they have to be. You might be thinking to yourself, like, well, isn't higher quality and higher resolution always going to be better? Isn't it better to always have the best resolution or the best quality that we can have? And in some ways that might sound like it's the best, but at the same time, there's reasons why if it's too large, it's going to be a problem. Not just that it wouldn't fit in the space that we need, But if the file size is too large, then it's going to take it a little bit longer to download. If I have a lot of images, that's going to take it a lot longer to download. And the web is all about speed. You want people to be able to access your site quickly. That content's going to download quickly for them, because most people spend maybe 3 to maybe 8 seconds looking at a page before they start to move on. If it takes more than a couple of seconds for everything to be on them instantly in front of their computer, they're not going to stick around and wait for it to download. They're going to get out of there. They're going to move to the next page. So we need to make sure that these are the right size. I can go up here to image and image size in Photoshop, and this is allowing me to check out the size of this image. Now here it's showing me my size in inches, and here it's showing me my size in pixels. I'm highlighting that right now because if you're used to looking at things in inches, that's a print-based way of looking at things. So if I'm looking at my image and I'm thinking about it in inches, it actually doesn't really help me to understand how it's going to be on the internet and on the web, because the internet and the web is viewed through a screen, a digital screen. Screens translate information through pixels. So pixels are what make up the image, that makes up the data that's being seen on the screen, and screens themselves actually have pixels. So that's it's kind of a two thing. So I need to actually know its pixel dimension, not its inches dimension, because the inches dimension is the size it is out in the physical world. Its pixel dimension is going to be the size it is on my screen. Right now it's telling me that its pixel dimension is 5,827 by 3,602, which is a lot of pixels. That's a wide amount of pixels, which is why it's taking up so much space on my screen. The other thing that I want to know here is what the resolution is. The resolution of this particular image happens to be 72, and that's actually a good resolution for me. So 72 is the standard web resolution for anything that's going to be on a screen. So if something's going to be on a screen, all it needs to be is 72 resolution, pixels per inch. We don't need any more than that, because actually if I change this resolution and I made it higher, for one, because I'd be upscaling it, that extra pixel information wouldn't be legitimate. It would be manufactured by Photoshop, so it wouldn't actually be making a higher quality. But even if I had a higher quality image, maybe straight out of a digital camera or something like that, and it had a higher resolution set to it, my screen can't see the difference. So it doesn't really matter if the image is 72 dpi or ppi versus 300 dpi ppi. If it's meant to be viewed on a screen, the screen can't see the difference between that amount of pixels. So that only matters to us if we're going to print the image out. In the print world, this is a little bit different. But in the screen world, it's just 72. We just need to have it set that. So if you ever download images off the internet, you will notice a trend usually that most of them are 72. Sometimes you see weird sizes. You'll see a 96 resolution, or people that put really high res images where it's 150 or 300 or more. But generally you find them at 72 because that's a standard for the web. So we want to make sure that ours are 72 under the resolution here. This number is where we keep that. And then this number, we want to make sure that changes the dimensions of the pixels to the size that we think that we need for it. So I'm actually going to come here. I'm going to change this to pixels so that I can change the size in pixels. And then I'm going to make sure that my images all have kind of a standard width or height for my purposes that I'm going to put on. So I'm going to choose a 400 pixel wide image. I'm going to make sure that they're 400 pixels wide. That would still be a relatively large size on a screen. It would go pretty wide, but it's not going to fill my whole screen. And if I hit OK, we're now going to see what this does.